And recording. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Tomi Akatunde. I'm the founder of Modern Maya, a platform that helps Black moms answer their biggest motherhood, life, and career questions through content and community. And tonight is our third night of Mama AMA, Ask Me Anything about back to school. Because a lot of the questions that I'm seeing in the community are all back to school related. And tonight we're focusing on navigating special education, IEPs, being the advocate that you want to be for your kids. And moderating tonight's event is Renee Pena Lopez. Sorry, I completely lost my notes with the bios, but Renee, do you mind introducing everyone to who you are?
Hi everyone, so I am a proud native New Yorker. I am a mama of a 4-year-old. I'm an early childhood inclusion specialist, so I work with like teachers of littles and homeschool mamas count to help make sense of the littles' play and finding the magic that makes them shine. So typically I work with kids who are on their way of getting IEPs, also or they have IEPs already, usually preschool from 3 to 5, but I consider early childhood birth to 2nd grade. So you can find me at themagicallittles.com or on Instagram at themagicallittles. And then I'm going to introduce the panel to everyone. So we have Jennifer Price here. And Jennifer Price is a special education attorney in Pittsburgh area. She is a former prosecutor for the Allegheny County Office of the District Attorney in both adult and juvenile divisions. With over 10 years experience, she believes in making sure every child has an opportunity to succeed both in school and in life. Her boutique law firm specializes in disability law, including special education law, guardianship, and special needs trusts. She is the author of the book Empowered Ed, using real case examples to look deeper into IEP management, where she summarizes legal cases and provides analytical questions in a workbook format to help parents analyze their child's education situation. Jennifer Price is a dedicated volunteer in the community and currently serves on the board of the Murrayville Community Library Foundation and the Girl Scout of Western Pennsylvania. So Jennifer, thank you for being on. I'm gonna go to Shalom Israel Diggs. Shalom Israel Diggs holds a BS, a bachelor's degree in dance education, and is in her final semester of earning her graduate degree in early childhood for master's of special ed. She has taught dance, gymnastics, and children arts workshops for over 10 years in New York City. While teaching, she has created the Alpha Key Club, an organization that encourages early literacy, empathy, high self-esteem, and self-expression through the creation of art and dance. Shalom Israel has taken her programs to Barnes & Noble's, Children's Museum of Manhattan, the Bronx Community of Art and Dance, the Convent Avenue Family Shelter, the Arts in Henderson Park, and many notable NYC organizations. Hi, Shalom Israel. Thank you so much for being on. All right, and our final, but definitely not least panelist is Samantha Everett, also known as Miss Sam. She's a pediatric occupational therapist. Also in like short layman terms, you might hear this throughout the talk. It's also referred as OT. She's also a children's book consultant and holistic wellness enthusiast. She has 10 years of experience working with children with developmental disabilities in various settings with trainings in feeding, sensory integration, pediatric massage, and reflex integration. Samantha loves incorporating holistic interventions such as mindfulness, yoga, and massage into treatment sessions, and uses children's books to teach independent living skills and self-regulation. Samantha currently resides in Illinois. Give me 1 second, where she serves infants and toddlers in early intervention program. So let's dive right into it, you guys. So I wanted, since, this is goes without saying, like we've never gone through a pandemic. And so can everyone explain how they usually work with families and parents and how that changed because of the pandemic? So I'm going to start with Sam and then have everybody else chime in.
Right. So I'm a pediatric occupational therapist, which pretty much means that I help kids be as independent as possible in their daily living skills. So whether that's play or school activities or daily living skills, that's what I help them with. So most of my experience has been in the outpatient clinic, where we see kids one-to-one. Parents can be in sessions, but a lot of them decide to wait in the waiting rooms. But it's very hands-on. So most recently, I transitioned to early intervention, where we do a coaching model. So we aren't as hands-on. We guide parents through the process of implementing recommended interventions for their kids to help with development. So the pandemic has definitely put a spin on how we do therapy. So of course we aren't as hands-on as we were before. In the outpatient clinics, I've seen them resort to teletherapy. So therapy is online. So parents are having to be more hands-on, right? And within early intervention, because we use that coaching model, parents were always more hands-on than in the outpatient clinic. So that's continued, but we are also doing teletherapy through that.
Okay, so for you, what has changed because of the pandemic is an additional service with doing teletherapy. Yeah, I mean, I find the same. I've done See It work and both early intervention. Early intervention, for you guys that may or may not know, is 0 to 3. See It and preschool is preschool age, so 3 to 5, and then we have CSE, which is a community committee of special education, which is the older kids, so 5 and up. Just so you have a sense of like age groups and what we're referring to. Okay, I'm going to turn the question to Jennifer. Same question. How do you usually work with parents and families, and how has it changed because of the pandemic?
Yeah, so my practice has changed some, but hasn't changed significantly. I will say before the pandemic, if anyone freely came into my office. Post-pandemic, I am not a fan of office visits. I will meet with people in the office if they really, want to meet me for the first time in person. However, you have to wear a mask. I have this big sign on the door, you got to wear a mask. We have to socially distance 6 feet apart. I tend to do more meetings just either over the phone or virtually. I feel very comfortable requesting a virtual meeting because I feel like at this point in time, everyone has just gotten used to virtual and has figured out how to work the technology. I will say though, in terms of caseload, I'm noticing more phone calls that kind of died down initially during the March-April timeframe. And now that school is ramping up and getting ready to get started, and there are so many different aspects to what's happening, and a lot of parents have a lot of questions or concerns about their child regressing and what to do, then now the phone calls have ramped up. So in terms of my interaction with families, that has changed in the sense that I don't do as many in-person meetings.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like the bulk of your work, like your day-to-day, only has changed in terms of platform. Is that right?
Right. Because even the IEP meetings, most of them are being held virtually. I have a client, for instance, who's going to go to who has an IEP meeting to schedule, and it's a new school district, so the school is willing to do an in-person meeting because the family is new to the district, but they would prefer to do that virtually. So even the IEP meetings being held that I've attended have all been virtual meetings, and the special education due process hearings I've done have been virtually. So it's really just been a change in platform.
Can I ask, because this was something that when we switched over, I do training 5s. I've done many of them, and changing virtually. I remember coaching families and asking, like they were asking, how do I prep for these IEP meetings that are virtually? Because like, it feels so especially when it's not Zoom, like it's over the phone, because you get like conferenced in sometimes. It's hard to like read people's, like tone, and you're like, what? No, like that's not what I said. So how can parents? I just want to piggyback, and then we'll come back to you, Shalom Israel. I have not forgotten that. Like, how can people prep for these virtual IEP meetings to be the best advocate for their kids, especially as they go back to school?
I would go through the IEP with a highlighter, taking notes. That way you really have some good, clear questions, and you can directly point them to what you're reading, what page, what paragraph, and be as specific as you can, so that everyone is on the same page to know exactly what you're talking about.
All right, no, that's great. And like strategy, right? All right, so Shalom Israel, do you want me to repeat the question, or are you ready to go?
I think I might have it. So my
Okay.
work I do with families, and then how it changed due to the pandemic. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think my work is pretty self-explanatory as a teacher. I work in the classroom day to day, 5 days a week. And post-pandemic, going into the end of last year, obviously that changed drastically overnight. We were all online. We were online. The way that it looked was based on the school, really. So the interesting thing was my school, and it appeared to be one of the only schools in the Brooklyn borough preschool to offer a virtual platform for twos, threes, and fours. And we offered that platform for 3 hours every day. Most schools, most parents, most teachers didn't think that was possible. However, we were able to manage from March 16th, I believe was our last Friday, through the end of the school year, which was June, offering this virtual platform 3 hours a day. Now, of course, this wasn't, the 6 hours a day that we were doing, but it was something, and we were able to sustain their attention for that period of time. I teach pre-K. And then we extended the year for an additional month. So we, instead of finishing at a certain period of time, the year was extended. And I'm not sure if other platforms or other schools were doing that as well, but that changed, allowing for parents to work into the summer, because it was just that feeling of like, we didn't really get to wrap up, that whole fear that I echo that fear that everyone feels about regressing. And then I definitely interacted with parents a lot more. I wanted my school to do more one-on-ones, because the virtual platform doesn't offer that one-on-one exchange as well. You would have to, pair off and do one-on-ones. So yeah, we weren't able to do as many of those, but I was definitely conferencing with parents. I was, texting and speaking with parents a lot more frequently, checking in with them a lot more frequently. And then trying to offer, resources, just support of all kinds, because I just needed the parents to understand that, what we're going through, we're all going through it for the first time together. And so I didn't want them to feel alone. So that definitely became a constant exchange between myself and the co-teacher and the parents.
Nice. So the next question I have is, so let's say your child doesn't have an IEP, but you're interested in getting them evaluated. What steps should you take now that we're social distancing and remote learning to get your child the services they need? Shalom Israel, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, yeah. The steps pretty much look the same. From what I've heard, from what I've seen, everything is virtually the same. And this can be researched on the New York City, well, for us, because I'm in New York City, on the New York City DOE platform, or whatever state offers that information on their public education platform. But the difference is, especially I can speak to New York City, the pace, because the pace was always slower. Trying to get these evaluations done. And my understanding is, whatever the pace was, parents have to learn patience, they have to be diligent, they have to be persistent and follow up. So the first thing would be that referral process. You have to have your student referred to be evaluated. Again, to be evaluated means that they would have to come in person. Are they going to come in person? It depends on your school. The first step would be to reach out to your school. Your teacher, whoever your child's teacher is, that would literally be the first step, and identify where is it that you feel your child may have a need for an IEP. So identify it first. And then after that, you have to find the right steps to referral, which ordinarily would be your school's teacher. Your child may not have been with your school's teacher for the past couple months. Your child may not be going to meet their teacher. So you have to find resources and ways to either get to that teacher or have someone come and evaluate them. And again, because of the pandemic, that may look different depending on your school, but at least the first step would be talk to your school, talk to the school where your child is supposed to be going, express your concerns, and like you've already mentioned, have your questions, have everything, written out, or at least, in your head. So that way, when you go to your child's teacher, the school principal, the school counselor, a lot of schools have counselors in place specifically for these processes. You would have to bring your concerns to that person, and then they will help you get to the next step. So you don't have to feel like you do it all by yourself. There's also, if you go on specific websites, actual emails, which I think might be very overwhelming for that person who's on that email. New York City DOE actually has a person, I was just looking it up the other day, actually has a specific person with their email. And I'm sure that email is incredibly flooded. However, they're offering that that pathway. So it would be nice to start there. And then of course, again, go to your school and start there and know that you're not alone. Just take each step one step at a time.
Yeah, and I just to piggyback on what you're saying, I am a big advocate of the earlier the better, especially because systems are now backlogged and a bit slower to get the work out there, both to the evaluators and the work to get out there to the districts. Like now it's taking directors and principals longer to process the paperwork and then get it to the proper agencies to process that work, to get the evaluations. It was slow, I feel like, across the country always, but now it's even slower. So just be mindful and do not be scared to say, hey, where are we on this? A week later, right? Because they do have a timeline. And Samantha, you know this from early intervention, there's a timeline in which everything has to be done. And I don't remember if they adjusted or not for the pandemic, but, or if they're going back to the tight timeline. I know it's adjusted for the pandemic and I don't know if it still is because I can't recall right now, but just know that legally there's a timeline that's supposed to get all this done. Am I right, Jennifer, with that to say that?
Right. Yeah. There's a timeline, but like you said, I mean, they relaxed it during the pandemic, but because there's all this still going on, they're not, school districts aren't going to be held liable if they can't adjust it.
And so to piggyback on that, the accountability piece, right? So NPR recently reported that the number of parents suing schools and state education departments on the rise. And this question's for Jennifer. Can you walk us through what that process looks like in regards to that?
Yeah, sure. So if you if you have an issue with getting compliance with your IEP, there are a couple of different things you can do. Yes, what I always tell parents is, where are you in the adversarial process? Because sometimes by the time I meet them, they are very just done. And then sometimes they really don't want to make any waves because their child is, 6 or 7 and they know they have many more years. So one thing you can do initially is to maybe request a facilitated meeting, and I facilitate an IEP meeting. If that doesn't work, then you can request mediation where a neutral party does a mediation. And then if that doesn't work, you can actually go forward with the due process complaint, which is when you are going forward with litigation. It really is effectively litigation. You're just not in an actual court building and it's not being heard by a judge, but all the same rules of evidence apply. For instance, for us as lawyers, the final decision can get appealed to a court to be heard by a judge. So it's taken just as seriously. And you would file that complaint. I know here in Pennsylvania, we have what's called an Office for Dispute Resolution. In order, if you want to file a due process complaint, I know in other states you can file it with your Department of Education. There's a special education department where you can file that. So you would file that, and frankly, it looks like any other complaint in the sense that you would need to state exactly what the allegations are. You want to be very as specific as you can. To give a notice as to the school district of what they are expected to defend against. So if you have dates, then dates are excellent. For a number of reasons, you definitely want to tie it down to some dates. If you don't know exactly Tuesday, October 6th, then at least October of 2019 school year at a minimum. And you want to write down all of the allegations that have happened. You want to explain exactly why you think this is a violation. So going forward, mentioning what the IEP or how the IEP reads, so that you can point to how it reads and how the school is violating it, what specifically they're doing that you're saying is in violation of that. And then what would be great, which I know can be a little overwhelming sometimes for parents, but what would be even better is if you can even point to an area of the law, which is why I say that can be overwhelming, because the IDEA statute is overwhelming. But if you can at least have some idea as to how it's violating the statute. If you're representing yourself as a parent, then that's not going to be that big of a deal. They'll be able to figure that out at a due process hearing. But that's the basic process of filing a complaint. You're essentially giving notice as to what your allegations are, so that the school district has an opportunity to defend against it, because that's what they will do. They'll file what's called an answer, giving a defense, either admitting or denying everything that you're saying has happened. And then it will get set up for a hearing in front of an impartial hearing officer. You'll have an opportunity beforehand to engage in what's called a resolution session. That is basically an opportunity to see if this case can get settled. Statistically speaking, most cases, just like in any other federal or state court, do get settled. And so that's the reason why they have set this resolution session up the same way as the court system. So you'll have an opportunity as a parent to meet with the school district and see if you can come to some sort of a settlement, as opposed to going forward with that hearing. And if it doesn't get settled, then you go forward with the hearing. And like I said, the hearing is taken just as seriously as anything else, where you have testimony, exhibits, direct examination, cross-examination. If someone needs to be subpoenaed, you should be able to request a subpoena for someone to go. You can get your expert if you have your evaluator, for instance. Maybe if there's an issue with the evaluation, or maybe you want an independent educational evaluation done by a certain person, or you want their methodologies to be included, not the school's methodologies, and you want to bring that expert on, you can bring that expert on. So it's pretty significant hearing.
Yeah, so I guess my follow-up question to that is basically know your child's IEP like the back of a hand, kind of. So because I've experienced when other providers don't provide services, but I'm always telling families to advocate for that service, because I'm like, legally, you are supposed to get this, right? Like, even if they're saying they're having a hard time finding a provider for speech or OT, right? You have every right to, as a CA, I've had to coordinate services. So I'm used to going through that process with families, but I always just remind them the IEP states it's a legal document that it has to be upheld. So you always want to try to get all your services before you go through that whole route. But it's viable. I'm sure it's overwhelming.
But can I just also say, I just thought about also just thinking about your article that you quoted from NPR. Mm-hmm. I didn't read the article that you're referring to, so I'm not sure exactly why they're saying the cases are, I think the cases are probably on the rise because of COVID, but right. I always stress to parents that they should look for an attorney to see if they can get represented, because I remember reading an article maybe 2 or 3 years ago stating that statistically the majority, and it was like, I mean, less than 10% of the parents won cases against the school districts, or because they tended to represent themselves. And so while less than 10% of parents had an attorney, 100% of the school districts had an attorney. So they were just out-resourced in the hearings, not necessarily that they probably may not have had, they probably did actually have a case, but maybe they just didn't know how to present it well enough, or whatever the case may be. So I always stress the parents to seek out an attorney. There is a provision in the law that allows for attorneys to represent parents pro bono, which would be for free to them. Yeah, there is. And a lot of parents don't realize that, but there is a way. And I have a practice where I have some private paying clients and some fee or free clients who don't pay me anything, because I just seek reimbursement back from the school district, and school districts are aware of that. So I mean, in theory, what it's called is that if you go forward with a due process hearing and you win, then and you're the parent, then the winning party can get reimbursement. But the way I do it is just by negotiating reimbursement of attorney fees in the settlement itself.
Can you put that in the chat, Jennifer, just so everyone has it, and if they want to copy and paste that particular information, they can walk away with that strategy? That would be really helpful.
Absolutely, yeah, because it's specific, and there have been cases where the courts have allowed parents to turn down a settlement agreement if it did not include attorney reimbursement, basically on public policy theories that a parent shouldn't have to, take out a loan to afford a lawyer just to get an appropriate education. So yeah, I'll definitely put that information in the chat, because I think it's important. I don't think a lot of parents realize that.
And I never knew that. That's important for we're advocates, right? Like if you're a teacher, if you're an OT, you have a touchstone, right? Touchstone. And so basically, the more you know, the more you can pass the information on. So I think that's important for everyone to know. Yes. So my next question is, how can you best support your child so they're not regressing or losing progress? And talk about regressing, Shalom Israel, right? That they made in school, and like the in-person service, and making sure that they get all the services that they need. Samantha, do you have any thoughts on that as an OT about regression and how to support families do that?
Right. This is an issue I've seen even before COVID. My first recommendation would be to lean into home programs. So your therapist,
I said talk about that in terms of because I think in terms of carryover, right? So people, and carryover is just what it sounds like, just to explain. So from one person to another person. Just from the therapy perspective,
therapy is done within the outpatient clinic maybe once a week, right? So you're seeing your provider only maybe an hour out of the week. And if you're in school, it's less than that. So you may see them a couple of times out of the month, if that. So most of that carryover is going to come from the home programs, which are exercises or activities, pretty much homework that you would do at home. But also what I find is that sometimes there's a disconnect between what families are able to do and then what therapists want the families to do. So you definitely want to communicate with your therapist or your teachers. What are some practical, realistic ways that you can carry over some of the skills that they've learned in school? Because families are busy. You have millions of other things to do. You don't want to be overwhelmed by home programs, just for one child. So you want realistic, practical activities that you can do.
And can I just also say, I find it helpful, when I ask about, what's the child, not just the IEP, right? I go through the IEP, but what's their strengths? So based off their strengths, what are some of the activities we can dovetail to, you know, to their strengths, so it feels like it's more organic, opposed to like, oh, we got to do this activity again, you know, like, yeah. And what kind of questions can parents ask in regards to that? Like, because they don't, right? Like, what should they be looking for when they're wanting to know more about how to support their child at home and not regress, especially in like teletherapy sessions?
Right. So if you're looking at a specific goal within the IEP, you would ask your therapist, okay, how can I implement this goal at home? What things can I use? And granted, we have like a lot of special tools that we may use in school or in the outpatient clinic, but you really don't need a ton of expensive tools. You can like find things at the dollar store. You can like go through the toy bin or like even your recycling container and find things that you can do with your children, you know, without spending a ton of money. I would start with the goals. So look at the goals and see, well, okay, how can I implement this at home?
Okay. Shaloma, Jill, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Everything that Samantha said is 100% correct. I think that carrying over those roles to the parents, she's 100% correct. Families are so busy. Families with multiple children are so busy. How do you integrate that one, or even two children in some circumstances, to support them in ways that their school and their service providers were? The fact of the matter is bottom line, there will have to be adjustments and you will have to make accommodations. Like, I hate to say that because we do have so many things on our plates and we do have so many priorities and so much time in the day. However, now that your child is home, you have to take a really hard look at the best way to support them. And 9.5 times out of 10, it means that there will be like that adjustment period. There will be that looking for resources at the dollar store. There will have, like, bottom line, there will just have to be. And that struggle and that transition and that adjustment, it's okay, because most of the time the setback is in like loathing and like, oh my God, I'm not doing this right. This is terrible. And you just have to give yourself room for that adjustment, give your child room for that adjustment, and then go out there, get those resources, be persistent, be consistent. Know that there will be some regressing, because there just will be. Children transitioning are going to lose some of that. They say if you're not using a skill, every single day, then it's gonna. So we transitioned into this remote model. Now we're doing like this hybrid thing. Like, just know that those things will take place and it's okay. And then you just have to slowly get into the routines that you want to have. Make sure that, like Samantha was saying, you know what the IEP is looking like, where your child is, and then finding those supports, find what works for your household. I say it all over my social media, and I've seen it all over Matt May's site and everything. Find those resources, be persistent, be consistent, don't give up, and know that your child will come with you wherever you guide them and lead them, and it'll work, it'll happen. But you definitely have to make those adjustments. That's just the fact of the matter.
Just to piggyback on this conversation, so what should student support look like now, and like what should parents be looking for? Should there be any, so we talked about, like, in regards to Jennifer's work, like the transition has been more of a platform change, but student support in the schools or in outsources such as like outpatient or or like push-in, what changes should we expect? And that's a hard question, right? Like, because like this, every time you talk about, there's like a new adjustment happening of sorts. But in any way that parents can feel that they can advocate for themselves, any changes that you're expecting, I should say, that they should be looking out for. Any ideas? I mean, I can start. So like push-in may be, you may have to be flexible about what push-in looks like, because some IEPs, some children are asked to do like 2 in a teamwork or to be in a group of 5, they may ask you to like revisit the IEP, and instead of like 5 kids, it might be revisited for 2. There's those type of adjustments for social distancing and making sure that the provider is able to give services, but still in a safe way. I've heard that people are starting to make those adjustments. Jennifer, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking especially if you have a child or children that have a tough time with transitions, then I would want to know, and I would have parents to ask the school, what would a transition look like if someone tests positive and now they're getting ready to go back to an online platform, or they're going to close the school for 14 days or however long, I would want to know, or I'd want my families to want to know that question, because I know I have quite a bit of families with kids with transition problems, and a transition is not an easy adjustment for them. So if the school closes, especially even if it just closes for 14 days for one child may not be a big deal, but to have to then go home for 14 days and now you're going back to school for the rest, and so I think that would be a big question. What is the plan so that you can then, as a parent, sort of prepare and know ahead of time, and then you can maybe help your child adjust accordingly if it does happen.
Yeah, it sounds like the key word here is adjustment, right? Like just both for like the parent and the child and all that, and all the changes that are expected. And talking about behaviors, are there some best practices for supporting children? So one example is transition, but it can be a medical fragile child. It could be a child that has oppositional diagnosis, or it can be a child that can be selective mute. So, like so many different needs. But did anybody have any other best practices for children, who have any behavior issues that you can see down the line that might be some support for them?
I always want to know what the triggers are. And I want to know specifically, I don't want to hear a task avoidance. That's like the key word that you see in everything, task avoidance. I want to know exactly what do you mean task avoidance? What task is he not understanding? Is it too difficult? Is it, like what exactly are you talking about? Maybe it's just the teacher, maybe it's the way the teacher's talking to him, maybe it's how he then responds if he feels like he is being condescending to the student, something like that, not just a basic 2-word task avoidance phrase, because typically there tends to be, from what I've seen, some kind of trigger that's very specific, and it tends to be consistent, maybe during the same time of day if he hasn't had breakfast, or maybe he's getting bullied on the bus, so it always happens right in the morning when he comes off the bus, or something to that effect. Yeah,
so it sounds like one of our piece of advice is not only know the strengths of your child, but know what sets them off. So I'm just gonna make an example, because I'm a person that's very much an example person. So like one thing that sets my child off is bath time. Like she hates getting her hair washed. She hates the touching. She has some sensory integration stuff. She hates the feeling of it. And so we have to like preview it. Like I feel like at dinner time, like, and that's at 5 o'clock, but bath time is going to be 6:30. It's close to an hour and a half of just preview. Means to just give her a heads up essentially before she actually does the task. And so we do that, and we know that's a big trigger for her. Like that's a transition issue, but it's also like she's expecting anxiety because she knows that she doesn't like the feeling of something on her hair. So as much as you communicate with the teachers about being on, like knowing the triggers, they can then plan for it both virtually and in school, right? So this is a partnership, and we're all trying to work together. And talking about partnerships, I know a lot of people are concerned about socialization. So and this is a question for Shalom Israel as well as Samantha and Jennifer. What opportunities can we give for socialization during this hybrid remote time?
Sure. So in the earlier years, socialization is one of the most crucial parts of schooling. At the end of the year, I was telling all my families, I feel very strongly about this because it's the one thing that we're incapable of doing at this point. Some of the resources and some of the solutions that parents were coming up with, and that I see also happening moving forward, are the parent pods or the quarantines. They call them like quarantines, because what you're doing essentially is finding a group of like-minded individuals who may have opposite or like schedules that you can actually set up socialization meetings. It's essentially a play date, but in this time and period, these are people that you trust, people that move and flow the way that your family does within the pandemic. And then people, you know, obviously probably close by. Those of us who are driving can probably find more remote partners. But what you're doing is setting up a family or a community of families and children that you can actually establish these periodic meetings with. If you're not in school, you know, this more than likely won't happen. If you are in school, you may be still distancing, so play will look a lot different. So having these pods of families, and what I see that people and parents are pushing towards is to create that group. And again, that it can't, you know, I feel like I want to say it can be your norms that you may be defaulted to before the pandemic, but now parents are having to think a little bit deeper about, and maybe some families don't operate the same, so maybe they can't go to their aunt's house, but those are the types of things that you want to set up. And although Zoom play dates are great, that physical interaction, conflict resolution by meeting physically is so important. And I feel so strongly as a pre-K teacher, and, you know, getting my master's in special education, it's just so crucial for them to have those opportunities. So like you guys were saying previously, to go back to that one question, but piggyback it, knowing your child's triggers, knowing how they interact, not forcing anything because they do need it. But you can't be like, oh, you're going to meet with, you know, Sally and Bob, you know, every Friday. And the kid is like, you know, your student's like, oh, I don't want to do it. So like knowing, knowing timing, again, being patient, having compassion for yourself, having compassion for your child when you're trying these things, because some of them may not work. Some socialization things may end up disastrous, but the key is to, again, keep trying and make sure the players that you're setting up to have these play date with, crucial, think it through, make sure the other family is comfortable, make sure make sure you have someone who is, oh my God, I lost the word, like not observing, make sure you have an adult present, make sure that, yeah, it's a safe environment. And a lot of outdoor environments I see parents going to, you don't necessarily have to go to their home when it starts getting colder.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Yeah, when it starts getting colder though, I mean, I know, you know, it's like, oh, it's so cold outside, but children are fine. They love going outside. Yeah, so that's still a safe place for them to go if it suits, you know, your family. But yeah.
And to piggyback on that, also like one tip that we do in our family is like, what are the no toys, right? Like your special like doll, your special like, so usually I put them a pie, and like as the play date's going, or the quarantine, I like that pod, I like that term. As it's going, like sometimes she'll be like, no, they can't play with that. And I'm like, wow, you made the agreement earlier, right? Like it's also accountability for them built in. Saying, and she's 4, right? So you made the agreement that they can play with it. If that is still not on the table, then we need to pull something off of your no toys, because it's only fair that you exchange it, right? So I think also like you're re-navigating your landscape with your child and your family, and with other families too. And I have to say, like, it's okay if a play date fails. Like I've always said that, but it's okay if it fails. So don't feel like because your child has different needs, and everyone does in a lot of ways, but like that, like because it wasn't like this perfect play date, it's okay, right? Because play is supposed to be messy, and socialization is always messy. Like everybody has their own way of communicating, getting things across. And it'll work, right? Like it will come together. So I just want to give that encouragement. And so like, what advice do we want to give parents whose child may have an IEP in a traditional school, and they are now interested in homeschooling or unschooling them.
There, yeah, I can speak to that. Well, the interesting thing is, again, you have to be flexible. You have to be versatile in how you are going to now educate your child. There are numerous programs, resources. You have to do your research. You have to get online, find the programs. I mean, there are so many programs, but they all may not be suited to your child. Likewise, depending on the IEP, you're going to be doing things in the home. You're going to be doing interactive things with the programming that you're finding. You're going to... Go ahead.
You're breaking up a little bit. So I was going to say, can you just go back a sentence?
Okay, sure. You're going to be having to interact with the programs. Am I okay now?
Yeah.
You're going to have to be interactive with the programs. You're going to need resources. A lot of the programs will ask you to get materials, so know that that will be part of it, and know, depending on your child's IEP, that you will, like you were saying, Renee, there's a lot of things, or maybe it was Samantha, forgive me, that we work with, service providers work with, that you can, Samantha said it, you can translate to your home environment. So know that that's part of it. I would encourage parents to know that transitioning to that it probably won't be as easy as you think it is, because of those resources, because of the time frame that it will take. But again, transitioning to anything is going to take time, and you have to be persistent. The other thing is, go to your school districts, your city, your town's Department of Education website, because I've seen it on New York City DOE, and if they have it, I know all of them have it. How to transition. They have supporting programs. These programs have been in place. It's just that now the magnitude and the volume of parents who are now accessing this has exploded exponentially. So therefore, the systems are in place. If they're virtual and remote, they will, be able to support the parents. It's just a matter of the caregivers and the parents providing and carrying out these programs. The other thing I would encourage, and the funny thing is, this is students with special needs and IEPs, or general education households as well. You still need that extra support. And the thing is, I was speaking to someone who it either was a colleague or a classmate of mine, who was speaking about parents who have nobody, who literally don't have family, who don't have significant others, who don't have distant, or maybe they're just new to the city and they don't have anybody to come into. And in my head, I thought, goodness, that must be wildly difficult. But believe it or not, there are programs for you too. Do the research. I know care.com has programs, and I looked within the New York City system because I was curious about that question. There's respite, and I hope I'm saying that word right, respite programs that allow parents who have students with special needs to get that break, to get that additional support. And it looks like many different things. So you really have to get online, go look up respite, that actual word, in terms of, getting the assistance. They have free programs. And that's probably the biggest thing, is knowing when you make that transition. Schools, although we're taxed, we still have armies, and we have a whole cohort of individuals who are dedicated to this, and now it's just you. And now it's just you and your partner. So, look for that extra support, look for like a rotation within that community we were speaking of, where you're trying to play off other parents, other caregivers in your neighborhood that you trust, of course, people that you trust, and do those, one-offs with the other parents. Because as long as you're operating and everyone's healthy, starting with yourself, then normally these systems, these transitions will hold up, because you yourself are in a good headspace, you have that support, and then it trickles down. So that's the other big thing that you have to think about when you're transitioning.
Thank you for that. Shalom Israel, can you just put the two resources in the chat so everyone else can
Sure.
just refer to them as they're as they are processing the information. As you can tell, I'm very much a teacher. Like, hey, all different formats to get the information. Does anyone have any advice for essential workers who are not available during typical school hours and how they can navigate their child's IEP, both advocating and their actual support within their education? Samantha, do you or Jennifer? Okay, cool. I couldn't tell who was.
What? Oh, Samantha, did you want to? You can go ahead, Samantha.
Well, I wanted to add to that, the last question. I had one more thing to add to that.
Oh, yeah.
I do know in some states, if you do decide to homeschool, some states do offer therapy services, school therapy services in home. So even if you don't want to do the school's curriculum, you can still access therapy services from the schools.
That's
even
great. Yeah.
I
know. That's good to know.
Right. And so, and also, like, don't be afraid to lean into outpatient therapy. I mean, there's OT services, speech, PT, ABA services where you can get several hours in the week of support as well.
And out speech therapy, just so everybody knows, and you're like for agencies and maybe hospitals, or I actually reached out for my child. There was like different programs here in the city, and Lehman is one of them. They have a great special speech program. And so we didn't qualify for early intervention. And what I did was I applied to the program because the grad students need people to work with, right? Like, and they are trained and they're supported by their supervisor. And so they're getting many layers of support. And they actually offered a lot of support while I was going through my child transition from their program to getting CPSC to getting her IEP. So yeah, there are different resources out there. So nearby colleges have strong educational programs, can also be a great resource. There's a lot out there, and I think just start where you can, and then work from there. I think it can be easy to get overwhelmed, and so I often tell people just take the micro to apply for the macro. Okay, cool. I just lost my list of questions. Sorry, you guys. Okay, so but in regards to like essential workers not being available during typical school hours, one of the things that pops in my mind, and we can all chime in, is let the teachers know that you are essential. Like, right? They don't know that you're an essential worker until you tell them, or that you work nights or any other needs. So let from like the director to the teacher know that you have different hours and that you need things scheduled off hours. You'd be surprised how often we're like, okay, cool, like we have to get this done, right? Like we have to get this meeting done, and because they care, we care as much as you do for your child. We want to make sure everything is on track, so they will accommodate as much as possible. But if they don't know that you need those accommodations, right, just like anything else, then it's going to get lost in a wind, because then they're just like, oh, you're just ignoring me, but you're not, right? You just have different needs than a typical 9 to 5 or a stay-at-home parent. So anybody else want to piggyback on that before I go into audience questions?
Well, I would say the same thing. I mean, to definitely let them know. I mean, certainly in the law, there's this concept of meaningful participation. So if your work schedule prevents you from being able to participate and they're disregarding you and your work schedule, then that could be an IEP violation, because you're no longer able to meaningfully participate in your child's education because they're scheduling during a time frame when they know that you are working. So, but again, like you said, it starts with you notifying them and letting them know that you're an essential worker, these are your hours, and so you need to have it scheduled. But I agree. I think some parents would be surprised at the level of accommodations that especially teachers will make. I found that any pushback, or most of the pushback, tends to come from administration, not the teachers. The teachers are in it for the kids and they love the kids. And so I've had teachers that will, especially during COVID, during the March, April timeframe, that were, online doing a virtual session at 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening, because that was when the time that the child was able to get to a laptop. She couldn't get to one during the daytime. So definitely just let the teachers know.
Yeah. And they made those accommodations too during the pandemic, just so you know, for most service providers from 8 a.m. to like 6 p.m. and sometimes even weekends, like some weekend, and some are like even the holidays. Like we worked spring break, we did not get so like a lot of accommodations are made, and I think it's going to keep going further. So what's one piece of advice that you want people to walk away with tonight? And I will start with Samantha.
I would say, remember, parents, that you are your child's first teacher and best teacher. Don't underestimate your role. You know your child better than anyone, regardless of whether we have degrees or not. So trust in that.
Great. Jennifer?
I would say, because I know, just because this issue came up recently with a client of mine, for parents who are thinking that their child has regressed during the COVID-19 school closures, and now, maybe seeking some sort of compensatory education, to slow down. At least in Pennsylvania, I know that the Department of Education is not open-minded, and neither are the hearing officers. They did a whole session on it, that they're not willing to entertain comp ed just yet, because from their perspective, there's no data from the school to actually show that your child has regressed. So even though you as the parent feel like he's regressed, there's no data in the school setting to show that he's regressed, so they're not entertaining those claims. So if you really think that he's regressed, then I would suggest take copious notes, observations, whatever you can, especially right now and in the beginning of the school year, to be able to build up a claim of comp ed, if that's something that you're going to be seeking.
And I would say partner up with the teacher about that too. Like let the teacher know, because they can also, because let's say they go for like a month and then they get closed, and then they go back to being open. There's your documentation right there. If there were regressions happening, it's happening in real time. So yeah, that's a great piece of advice. You guys have lovely nuggets. All right, Shalom Israel.
I would say communication, just like I tell my students, communication, and being proactive. The most successful pre-K and early childhood classrooms are classrooms where teachers are being proactive. The most successful students are students where the communication between parents and school is seamless, is frequent, and I happen to believe that should continue, but it's more often seen in early childhood education. So what Jennifer was talking about, what you spoke about, Renee, where if your child's school transitions, have that communication in place already, so that you already know what the student is working on. You already have those details. You know how the teacher responds. You know who your student gravitates towards, so that if they have to transition, that's okay. Let's go to the next step and figure out from there. Communication to your teachers, to your child, within your household, on that communication part is so important, and it's important anyway, but now that we're in this pandemic and we're having to kind of respond to a lot of things in real time, communication is key, and making sure that, much like you spoke about, like everyone spoke about, knowing in advance, you know your child best, try to set them up the best way that you can to have success, and know that it's not necessarily that they're having a bad day or like whatever. There's just a couple things that you can tweak that they may respond to that can help them be successful. So communication and being proactive are big.
Cool, awesome. So we have some questions from the audience, and so I'm gonna get to them. Some of them are overlapping, so hopefully I address everyone's questions as needed. One person stated, I would definitely like to know more. I'd like to know some resources of keeping kids on the spectrum interested in online learning. So this question was directed to Sam. So do you have any resources in regards to kids who may be on a on the spectrum? Or I would just think any kid really kind of struggling with online learning, but especially kids on the spectrum.
I would definitely use social stories. So social stories are stories that help particularly kids on the spectrum with a particular problem. So for example, wearing a mask. So kids who may have tactile sensory issues may have a hard time wearing masks in public. So you could find a social story, which is what it is. It's a story about wearing a mask in a public place. A resource that I came across is called Autism Little Learners, and they have tons of social stories in various languages, and a lot of their COVID social stories are free. So I can put that in the chat box so that parents can access that.
Cool, great, thank you. Next question. Sorry, I lost track. How do you best navigate an existing IEP with a hybrid school plan? So like 2 days in school, 3 days remote. Anyone have?
Yeah, I think I kind of answered that with the communication.
You did, yeah.
But yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
But I was just gonna say, like, I guess parents are maybe the question behind that, and I don't know if the person's still on, but maybe like how to deal with like all the push and pull outs, different moving things. I mean, what I would say is defer to your school. So don't become the coordinator of all things. Right? Like your job right now is to manage your child and their needs. And so that's a job in itself, right? We're going to agree on that. And so let the school, you're the one that's going to stay on top of it, like making sure those services are happening. But the coordination part, I think it has so many other moving pieces of other children's schedules and other like provider schedules and like number of people being in a building and people being in a classroom. As you can see, it's a lot of different moving parts. I think that's something you defer to the school, right? And trust that the school choice you made and the principal and all the support team is at their best on hand trying to get all the kids the services that they need based on their IEP. I think just lighten your load a bit and give yourself grace to allow the school to support you in that manner, would be my suggestion. How do I set up a home classroom? Any thoughts on that?
Oh my goodness, there's so many wonderful things. But it's particular because I wrote about this on the article that's posted on Mattermea. In the topics of going back to school and preparing for homeschooling. The thing is with that, it really depends on the space, but what you do want to do is carve out the space. So whether your apartment home is big or small, whether you have parts of your home, only a small part of your home, because maybe your home is big, but you haven't carved out a space for your learner. So the things in particular, you have to make sure that it has little to no distraction. But again, like we're all saying, know your child, because some children are completely fine. They can be in the middle of a ball pit and be fine learning. So know your child, but also generally speaking, students will learn better in smaller spaces that are void of lots of different materials or things that will pull their attention to something else. And then again, if you're dealing with a student with special needs, know what items they may need to refer to, know which items they may need to touch, or which items that help to maintain their focus by touching, interacting with these items. So you really have to know your your learner. And then the other thing I feel is key, but again, may not work for everybody, is making sure they have a clear workspace. So I frequently saw my parents having the child up on a desk, and then the children that were on the floor were like lying out and they're like on the rug, So giving them a space to sit up, and a lot of times small desks, and chairs that suit the child's need are not always available. So just making sure they have a clear space where they can work for those items that maybe have less things that they're material working with, that should also be present if possible, and carving out that space.
Yeah, I have a child that likes to move. So one thing I had to realize was like the couch was a oddly okay space for her. But like there were days where like I was like, no, you have to be sitting in a chair. So also know that the space may have to be flexible, but consistent. Like she knew there was only like 2 spaces that she can really participate in. So I think that having those boundaries helped. Another question is, how do I make sure that 504 accommodations are major in distant learning? Jennifer, do you have any thoughts about that? Especially first, let me go back. What's a 504? 504, because we've been talking about IEPs for most of our conversation. So some people may not know what that is, and how do they make sure that it's getting done during distant learning?
Sure. So 504 is a service agreement that is for kids with disabilities. The main difference, legally, there are a lot of differences between a 504 and an IEP. I think the most obvious significant difference that I can explain is that a child with a disability can get a 504 if they need accommodations, but a child with an IEP has a disability, and that disability is negatively impacting them receiving an appropriate education. So there's some sort of barrier to the child with a disability actually being able to get an education, so they need an IEP. Someone with a wheelchair, for instance, may have a 504 plan, but not necessarily an IEP, is an example I can give. So in order to make sure that it continues to be implemented, the question I believe you said was what during the virtual learning setting, is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it all comes down to communication and finding out exactly what accommodations are going to be made during the virtual setting, especially if they're going to be presumably different than the way they were in the in-person class setting. What are the accommodations going to be? How are they going to be implemented? Who is going to be your contact person if that person is going to change, if you have any questions about anything or have any issues or even have any technical difficulties, especially coming up with the virtual setting, or maybe if there's something on the technology side that may not be agreeing with your child in the virtual setting. So some changes might need to be made, kind of finding out all of that, because I would suspect that might be a big change to the 504 plan that needs to be made, instead of it reading the same way as it did when you were in school. Maybe now another accommodation needs to be some sort of change to the platform itself. But definitely communication is going to be the key, and finding out exactly who is going to be your point of contact for all of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. So one person asked, I'm trying to decipher this, so give me a second. Any idea on how to extend their learning time? My son's full day of instruction has turned into less than 3 hours a day. Sam, do you have any ideas? I just want to make sure I understand this question right. So their child's instruction is less than 3 hours a day. So I'm assuming they're home. So I guess, how would you coach a parent about how to extend their learning time when they have a shorter time? Not particularly sure, but if someone has a thought about that, just let me know. Maybe we can think, yeah.
I think it's not a bad thing that the time is short. I think it's okay to be flexible. School doesn't have to look like school. It doesn't have to look like what traditional school looks like. Well, I think there was a second part to that question.
So how to extend the child's learning. So I'm not sure if they mean like,
It maybe tolerating sitting at a computer.
I was just wondering that. Yeah, there's not enough information, so maybe we can just
Well,
put it in that light.
yeah, what to jump in? Sorry, ladies.
No, don't be
Like,
sorry.
yeah, to extending education, like, so for our school, you know, the students were coming in 8:39, and then they were finishing at 2:30. So now they've gone to 3 hours a day. So
Mhm.
like, how do you entertain, I guess, the student through the rest of what would ordinarily be a day? But
Okay.
also, yeah, yeah, since they only have 3 hours and they're used to getting those additional 2 hours, I feel like a lot of my parents were like, I guess we're done at noon. Like, what are we going to do until dinner? You know, like some parents didn't necessarily have,
That's a question. Yeah.
yeah,
I was just
have
like,
those resources. So they're like, what do we do for these
right.
additional? So our school came up with some resources where we were offering after school sessions that were only
Okay.
an hour. And so you got to look for those. Sometimes your school may provide it. Maybe you can even get a group of parents together and get your school to provide it if they're not already doing
Yeah,
that.
that's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure about DOE if they're doing things like that, because the New York City DOE looks a lot different. But for private schools and early education centers, a lot of them are coming up with these resources for parents, and it kind of gives the parents a way to schedule the day. So they're done at noon, and then they have like 2 hours to eat, take a nap, then they're getting back online with us at 2 o'clock until 2:30. Then we're giving them an assignment or something. So I think that the schools, like you were saying, Renee, there's a lot of shifting of responsibility. So we can't look to the schools to do everything, but you also shouldn't, feel like you got to carry this whole thing by yourself. The hybrid, which is what we're doing. So look for small, short stints that you can, and even, it may not even necessarily be that your school is like lacking providing of science or whatever. It could be that your student excels at that. So look for short programs where you can, okay, we're having science at 2 o'clock. Oh, then we're going to go on with your teacher at 3. Let's do some math. And there's plenty of programming where you can set that up. And for students with special needs, having the schedule present, visible, sticking to it, and know that you can change it, but it shouldn't be something that's changing every single day. Now you're doing something, have some sort of familiarity with it where you're filling in the day. And what I feel worked before the pandemic was that there was that schedule that was kind of consistent. And then post, now the parent is kind of more responsible for that schedule, but just make sure it's consistent and know that there's a wealth of resources. And once you tap into the ones that work for your student, that your student likes, because then a lot of times people are going to the computer to fulfill the rest of the schedule, and some students aren't sitting through that, and they need, so make sure they stand up and they're jumping around. They go outside, they come back, they go online, and that's kind of how our school, within those 3 hours in the day, managed. Get them up, lie them down, do some yoga, teach some math. You're constantly there, and then it's consistent every single day. They know that they're doing this, so that hopefully will.
Yeah, and to definitely with the consistency, one thing we invested in was Kiwi crates, and so basically they're like this art materials, art projects, and you get every month, and we actually spread hours out, and so she doesn't nap anymore, so when it's rest time, we do QE crates like quietly, or we do a podcast. So it could be flexible enough that like, if your child is a bit extra more energy and you know that they're not going to sit there and like lie down and listen to a podcast or lie down and, rest quietly. But, do a puzzle quietly or something like that, but need something slightly more throwing that energy out there, but you don't want to go outside because you know that it's so important to wind down in the middle of your day. You want to keep that consistent with the school because the schools also has that schedule. You can have these quiet moments and just, write a list for yourself. That's what I did for a while. I was like, what would be helpful during the time if I don't know, right? Like it was basically like, if I'm not sure what to do, I'm going to refer back to this list. So that's a great question.
Can I just say, jump in real quick and just say that I would piggyback on everyone, but including Samantha especially, and that I think parents should just be open-minded and flexible, that, you know, every day doesn't have to be a regimented day.
Yeah.
And it's okay to, you know, let them at 12 o'clock when the regular virtual session is done or whatnot, go outside and get some chalk, sidewalk chalk, and draw a beautiful picture. You know, it just kind of takes some of the pressure off, because they're still getting some level of education, and then they can still be a kid and all of that. So,
yeah. And I think what's adjusting, especially if your child has an IEP, if you see that they're craving more socialization, maybe that's when you put, you know, that time in, like, because they have online school and they're doing all the things and having all the providers. Maybe you prioritize socialization over, you know, and you can be honest with your providers if you're like, we really can't do that much OT. Like, we really need that my child to socialize at that time. Like, you need to be able to advocate and also be open and honest to say that, because your kid may need that, like, right? And then you may be able to come back and be like, okay, we can revisit, you know, having these the consistent SIA services. Like, it always morphs and changes. Just to go into that, someone else had a question about how should parents advocate for modifications that the school is unwilling or unable to provide. I feel like we answer that. How can parents of students with special needs demand a lesser workload for the upcoming school year? So this piggybacks on that same idea. Anyone want to jump start that question? So how can parents of students with special needs demand a lesser workload for the upcoming school year? And it can also, I think it also could also be then flipped to, like, maybe also how many hours in front of a screen too, right? Like, I've had students that, you know, the parents thought they would do amazing, and because they watch TV and, like, you know, they seem to, and they play video games, that they would enjoy doing teletherapy, and teletherapy has not worked, and they were like, can we cut back on this? So
yeah, I was gonna kind of, like, I have just a few thoughts on that, but I feel like the school loads, I'm kind of like perplexed in a school that would be overloading students. So I'm kind of curious as to what is that school doing that is overwhelming that particular child with a workload, because the schools should have adjusted, period, to the pandemic. And then now that we're starting the school year this way, I foresee that should be happening. So if I'm kind of confused as to what school would be kind of like overloading a student. And so that would be, like, I guess my first thought is, like, what is happening in this school? And then the steps to take to advocate for how to manage that, again, is the communication piece, but perhaps someone else on the panel has a little bit more to speak on how to proceed with that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the same as you. I was wondering what exactly was happening. I mean, I guess the first thing that I can think is maybe the school has gone to a fully virtual setting in a typical 8 to 3 time frame, and so they're concerned that their child is sitting in front of the computer all day long. I guess is the first thing that I'm thinking of. So, I mean, to manage that would be to consider other ways to learn for your child that would also be just as effective. So if the problem that I found with that with some parents is that it then places them in the teacher position, and then they may not be comfortable with that, or they don't know the material well enough, and they don't feel confident being able to teach the material, whatever it is. So definitely have a conversation with the school to find out if there's just another form of learning that can happen. I know I know here they're trying out a couple of different options, so it's not so much of packets being sent home and worksheets going home every single day, but just find out all the different options from your school and whether there is another option that can happen, and then also whether that's an option that could be viable for you. And then the other part that I think of is, if you're looking for lesser hours, then what is that schedule going to look like? And, are you asking for maybe, a class from 8 to 9, and then your child has a break from 9 to 9:30 and then gets back on at 9:30? Is that what you're looking for? Because I'm sure that can get worked out if it's just a matter of maybe removing like what we call here in Pennsylvania, the specials, like the art and music and all of that. If it's maybe taking some of those classes out, so that's the time that your child has a break from the computer screen.
Okay.
So then he can then log back on when it's just for the main courses.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm finding, I guess, from parents is that they're learning about their child as well, right? Like, because I always think of school as like the secret world, right? Like that sometimes my child goes into, or like your child goes into, and then they come back home and they report to you. Now there's this, I kind of think in a way this pandemic has opened up both sides of communication of like, you're seeing what home life is like and you're seeing what school's life is like, and you can adjust as needed. So I think as like you guys said, as much communication doing back and forth, but also be realistic with like, I've had some families be like, oh, I want all this. And I'm like, that's not going to be possible, right? Because as a teacher, your bandwidth is only so much, right? And so is parents, right? So you also have to be realistic in that sense. So also keep that like expectation great, to have high expectations, but also to pair it up with like, if this IEP goal, was in the beginning going to be a challenge in the classroom, and now you're going back and forth, know that this is something that more likely will carry over into next year. There are other goals that can be accomplished that will probably partner along, because they're usually IEP goals that partner with each other that can be addressed. And so I really implore you to like, just get creative with it, right? And like, you might not even know, like at dinner time, you're doing like these IEP goals, but you are, right? Like it'll just start. And I found it helpful to be in my child's speech sessions, because she was having them in school for so long. And then it was helpful to hear when her speech therapist was giving advice. And I was like, oh, yeah, we didn't see that at all, right? But she saw it in the classroom because of the social setting. So yeah, definitely that, and that wall has come down, and use that to your advantage right now. Like use that as much as possible to your advantage. So what are some recommendation ways of supporting a dyslexic child enrolled in public school entering a grade ahead of which they should be from an academic developmental perspective? Whatever. Sorry, I need to read that twice.
Yeah, that question, because I just wasn't clear on when you said that the student was dyslexic but is entering school a year ahead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. But what are recommendation ways of supporting a dyslexic child enrolled in public school entering? So I guess they're wondering how to advocate for their child who's dyslexic, right? And even if they're a year ahead or their current year. So I would say, like, personally, I am dyslexic. I didn't get diagnosed until high school, which is why I'm such a big advocate of early intervention and early childhood, getting the services that they need, so you don't fall through the cracks. But one thing I would definitely say, if a child's a year ahead, and this is just my always perspective, that is, I actually am more concerned with the social emotional learning piece, that character education piece, than the academics, because the academics, I personally feel like you can get so much support from the teachers and from the student support teams that you have. And there are programs both online like Kumon um, and such that we have out there, right? That the academic can be taken care of. I often find with gifted, it sounds like your child's twice exceptional, and this is just from meeting the question. But I often find with gifted children, their biggest struggles is growth mindset and like perfectionism and being very sensitive to the work that they're doing. So they get their frustration tolerance is like, I can't do this, right? Like they automatically go to that I can't point because it doesn't come to them easily. And so personally, I look at your child's IEP and actually see if there's any social emotional component in there, because the academic piece will be addressed. But if your child doesn't feel supported emotionally, it's hard for them to address their academic needs. So that's just my personal point of view, being my personal experience of being dyslexic and just being perfectionist at the same time.
I would also add, it may also be helpful to use a multisensory approach to learning. So, just instead of just writing sentences, like you can write with different mediums, like with chalk on a chalkboard or outside on the sidewalk, or writing letters in shaving cream. Just make it fun and different to.
Samantha,
sorry, I'm breaking up.
No, you're breaking up a little bit. I just want to repeat back. So she was saying chalk, shaving cream, other mediums. Just keep going. You're breaking up a bit.
Yeah, just using other mediums to stimulate the different senses to help with overall learning. And I mean, it's fun to like drawing in shaving cream. Like, I mean, that's more interesting than just writing with a pencil. And because with those kids, you definitely want to build up their confidence and focus on their strengths, focus on what they can do, and make learning fun.
Yeah, and I would just piggyback on both of those about making learning fun and building up their confidence, because dyslexia is definitely one of the disabilities that can coexist with depression, which can come from not having the confidence and feeling insecure when you're called on for an answer in class or whatnot, and so it can then lead into other coexisting disabilities. So it's definitely important. The social emotional factor is definitely important, and certainly building the confidence aspect.
Yeah. I mean, and I would say also depression, anxiety, because I suffer from anxiety because of that. Like I definitely hated being called on. Like reading your bios, you guys, honestly, I was like, oh my God, I'm having class. I was like, triggering me. But I made it through because, I've learned my accommodations.
You did great. I jumped in just to say that. I'm sorry. I wish I had known. You did great.
It's actually a good thing because it's, it's stuff. See, like, you're always working through your disability. I always tell parents, like, they're like, especially if you have little ones, you're thinking, and I just, parent to parent, like, person that also has a disability, like, it's not a one-time thing. So like this pandemic will go through its phases and we will all come through at the other side, but your child will be with you. And I think, Shalom, Michelle, you touched on this, will be with you through that journey. And you're their partner throughout the whole thing. Like the teachers will change, the schools will change, and so on and so forth, and then providers will change. But in the end, you're their advocate. So like, and they will always have what they're going through. Like they will learn how to be themselves even more with their disability in regard to like, but I think like the more we think less about like, oh my kid's at IEP, instead of just this is my child and this is who they are and how they process the world, then when you're going into this pandemic and going to the school year and saying like how to advocate, it's like, how do I get my child the best things they need? If you start with that question, then one person asks like, how can I learn my child's learning process? I personally am all about documentation, like we've been saying throughout this whole conversation. and observing and recording and getting, like, it can be photos, it can be videos, and you're going to see trends, like Samantha said about the sentinel piece. Like, the reason I was asking people to do both chat and, like, because everyone has different ways of processing the information. Like, not everyone's audio about this. They may need to see the resources to go, oh, I should check that out, right? So learning about your child and who they are is a journey. And so you're just, this school year is just a piece of that journey. And it's going to be a different one. And it's going to be, I'm being honest, like, it's going to be like scary. You're going to feel frustrated, and but know that you're not alone. Like, schools are going through it, administrators are going through it, teachers are going through it, lawyers are going, like, everyone's going through this. And so our job here to support you guys, and I applaud Tony for having us here for Modern Mayor. I really, really appreciate this conversation. So just to wrap up, I want to honor you ladies and let people know where they can find you. So I'm going to start with Jennifer first.
Sure, thanks. I am on Instagram at JNN_O_Price. It's the same thing on Twitter at Jen_O_Price. My website in general is jenniferpricelaw.com.
Okay, great. And then Sam, let me just get to make sure I have a Samantha. Where can people find you? Where are you more active?
You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Miss Sam and Me OT.
Nice. So it's the same handle for both.
Same handle.
Okay. Just triple checking for people. Angela Michelle?
Yes, it's so interesting, these social platforms, sorry, because I have like all of them, and of course all my handles are different, but that's okay. But thank you, Toby. But my website is alphakey.club, so it's a little bit different, alphakey.club, and I'm on Facebook as the same, Alpha Key Club. But on Instagram, I have both at Join Alpha Key Club and at Alfie Adventures, ALPHEE Adventures, for an online series cartoon that's educational. And then for YouTube, it's Alfie Adventures as well, where you can find educational fun content and soon cartoons. And then I'm on Twitter, but that handle is at Alpha Key AA book, and that's for my Alpha Key activity book that I have. So lots of handles, lots of social media. I'll see you guys on one of them. Hopefully.
I love how many resources just within our group that we have. So don't feel like, you can fall down the wormhole, but we're here to support you guys. So don't feel like, so I'm Renee Pena Lopez. Mine is themagicoflittles.com. Facebook is The Magic of Littles. Instagram is The Magic of Littles. And then I have a free Facebook group for teachers of littles called The Magic of Littles Club. So super original, and I think just because I was like, I'm gonna keep it the same.
I love it.
Yeah, as you can see, I got like lazy and keep it the same. So thank you so much for having questions from the audience. Thank you, Tommy, for having all of us.
Oh man, I'm in an overly air-conditioned room, but I also would have chills even if I weren't. Like, this was such an amazing, informative, powerful evening. I thank each and every one of you for being here for the community, to answer these questions, and to do so in such, like, just a really, I'm at a loss for words, and I very rarely am. So thank you all so much for being here. And yeah, this is going to be on our Facebook page, on Modern Maya's website. So for those of you who came in a little bit late on Facebook, you'll be able to watch from the beginning. And yeah, just thank you so much for being here. Tomorrow's Mama AMA is about juggling work and school. Someone messaged me and was like, just tell me the code. And I don't know I don't know if we have a code per se, but we'll
Yeah.
definitely have some strategies to help with that. And then Friday is supporting your kids' emotional well-being. So we'll have some children's therapist and a family therapist on to answer your questions about that. So yeah, thank you guys so much again. This has been really amazing. I look forward to staying in touch with all of you and seeing all the people watching along tomorrow. And I'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Bye.